You handle everything yourself. The broken appliance, the financial stress, the emotional weight you've been carrying for years. You figure it out. You always figure it out. And when someone asks if you're okay, you say yes, even when the honest answer would take an hour to explain. This isn't just a personality trait. It isn't stubbornness, and it definitely isn't strength, at least not in the way people assume. There's a name for what you're doing, and once you understand where it actually comes from, you'll never see yourself the same way again.
Think back to the house you grew up in. For a lot of Gen X, people born roughly between 1965 and 1980, that house was often empty after school. Both parents working, or one parent managing everything alone, or an atmosphere where emotional needs simply weren't part of the conversation. You learned, early, that there was no one to call when things went wrong. Not because your parents were villains. Most of them were doing exactly what survival required. But the effect on a child is the same, regardless of the reason. When you reach for help and no one comes, you stop reaching. Psychologists call this the Latchkey effect, a generation of children who became self-managing out of necessity, not choice. By age 8 or 10, many Gen X kids were making their own after-school meals, managing their own time, solving their own problems. Nobody taught you resilience. You built it because you had no other option.
And here's the critical thing that most people miss. The brain of a child doesn't distinguish between my parents are working and can't be here and my needs are not worth responding to. To the developing mind, both feel the same. What happens next is where psychology gets fascinating. When a child repeatedly experiences unmet emotional needs, the brain does something remarkable. It adapts. It rewires. Specifically, the brain encodes a survival rule. Dependence is dangerous. Not as a thought, not as a decision, as a deep, automatic, unconscious instruction that governs behavior for decades. This is what researchers call hyperindependence, and it's now widely recognized not as a personality type, but as a trauma response. The difference between healthy independence and hyperindependence is this. Healthy independence means I can handle things on my own, and I choose to. Hyperindependence means I must handle things on my own, because asking for help feels physically unsafe. One is a choice, the other is a compulsion. And the cruel irony? Hyperindependence looks like strength from the outside. People praise you for it. They call you reliable, capable, low maintenance. What they don't see is the cost. Research published in 2025 found that students with a history of childhood trauma, including emotional neglect and what's called parentification, being forced to take on adult responsibilities too young, showed significantly higher levels of hyperindependence compared to their peers. The brain's threat detection system had been permanently recalibrated. Not broken, recalibrated, for a world where needing people was a liability. The problem is, that world was your childhood. It is not your present. But the brain doesn't automatically know that. Let's make this concrete. Hyperindependence in adult Gen X doesn't look like dramatic isolation. It looks like everyday patterns that feel completely normal because they've always been there. It looks like taking on more than your share at work and quietly resenting it, but never redistributing the load. Struggling in silence during a financial crisis, researching every option alone, telling no one, even your partner, until you've already solved it. Dismissing emotional support when it's offered, not because you don't want it, but because receiving it feels deeply uncomfortable, almost wrong. I'm fine, don't worry about me. Not because you don't want it, but because receiving it feels deeply uncomfortable, almost wrong. Difficulty delegating,
because some part of you doesn't trust that anyone else will do it right, or that they'll follow through, or that they won't disappear when you need them.
And in relationships, this is where hyperindependence becomes quietly devastating. Intimacy requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires the willingness to need someone. But if your nervous system learned that needing is dangerous, then every relationship has a ceiling, a point past which you won't let anyone in. Your partner feels it, your children eventually feel it, and often, you feel it too. A loneliness that doesn't make sense because you're surrounded by people who love you. Here's what nobody talks about. Carrying everything alone is exhausting. Not just emotionally, physically. Research consistently shows that people who maintain genuine social connections, who actually allow themselves to rely on others, report significantly better physical health outcomes. The immune system, the cardiovascular system, sleep quality, all measurably better in people who practice what researchers call healthy interdependence. Hyperindependence, over decades, is a form of chronic isolation. And chronic isolation has the same physiological impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. There's a line from the psychology literature that captures this perfectly. "I don't need anyone" is not a statement of strength. It is a statement of loss. It means I learned that needing was dangerous, and I built an entire life to make sure I never had to need again. That sentence might have just described your whole life. And if it did, that's not a flaw. That's a wound. One that happened before you were old enough to have any say in the matter.
Gen X didn't choose to become the generation that handles everything alone. You were shaped by circumstances that required it. Empty houses, underfunded schools, economic betrayals. Parents who were themselves never taught how to be emotionally present. You adapted. Brilliantly. But adaptation and healing are different things. Understanding that your self-reliance has roots, that it was built, not born, is the first step towards something most Gen X people have never really had: the option to choose. Not to abandon your independence, but to hold it differently. To let it be a preference rather than a survival mechanism. You were built without instructions, but that doesn't mean you can't write new ones. If this landed for you, subscribe. Every week, we go deeper into the psychology behind how Gen X thinks, feels, and moves through the world. The next video, why Gen X doesn't trust easily, and whether that instinct is protecting you or costing you.